back in. Some of you took exception to some of the things that I was saying during my last presentation. I just want to be clear, and I want to also just give you an illustration to help you see where I'm coming from. Let's say there's a husband who is treating his wife honestly really bad. And you go and you ask him, are you loving to your wife? And he says, yes. But if you ask her, do you have a loving husband? What's she going to say?
There's four
What's she going to say? No. And if you go back to him and say, but your wife says you're not very loving, you say you're a loving husband, what could the husband say? And this isn't a hypothetical situation. I'm not making this up. What could the husband say? Talk to me.
Lying.
Well, she just doesn't know what it feels like to be. She doesn't really know what it's like to be what? Love. So think about it. Would it be in his best interest for him to listen not to his enemies, but to his friends? When his friends say to him, no, dude, you really are a jerk. You need to be nicer to your wife. How many think that would be in his best interest to listen to that? Here's my point. Who's the person to ask in that scenario if he's a loving husband? Him or her? Who's the one to ask? Her. She's the one that should be asked. How many would agree with that so far? If you agree, say yes. My only point is this. When you ask most of the people out there, do they feel loved by Christians? Once again, praise God for the few exceptions. Unequivocally, what are they saying? Talk to me. What are they saying? What are they saying? They're saying no. And if you tell Christians this, what are Christians tempted to say?
Yes.
They just don't know what it feels like, what it really means to be loved. They just don't understand love. Do you see how we would like to pit it against them? Would it be in the interest of the husband to listen to a friend that says, no, dude, you really are a jerk and you need to learn how to love your wife a little better? Would it be in the best interest of you? How many would agree with that? Would it be in the best? That's where I'm coming from. I think it would be in the best interest of those who claim to be following him to take just a short look at ourselves. Just before we try to change anyone else, take a look at ourselves, because the statistics are in. When you ask non-Christians what they think of Christians, there's a list. And once again, I recommend to you the book, Unchristian. And humble, servant, other-centered love doesn't, and it breaks my heart, it doesn't even make the top 100 on the list. How many are shocked by that when the studies are done? It doesn't even make the top 100. So that's where I'm coming from. Now, as we begin this next section, the Jesus dialogue, the reason we're calling it that is because a few years ago, I was sitting on an airplane, and I fly a lot for a living. What I do, I'm traveling from here and there, and I'm on an airplane an awful lot. And a few years ago, there was what do they call that? A consolidation at my local airport. And the town that I fly in and out of now is only being serviced by one airline. That's Delta Airlines. Whether you're a fan of Delta or not, it's irrelevant, and that's my only option now. So I have flown for the last couple years on Delta alone. And as I fly on Delta now, if you're just doing one airline, I used to go with whoever's just cheapest. But now if you're using just one airline, you accrue a lot of frequent flyer miles very quickly. As those accrue, there's been some perks to that. I buy the cheapest back of the plane ticket I possibly can. And now I walk up to the front counter and I show them my little tag, and they see who I am, and I say, well, hello, Mr. Montgomery, and welcome to Delta Airlines today. We're so glad you chose to fly us. And I'm looking around saying, you're welcome. And then they turn around and they hand me, complimentary now, my seat in first class. I think that's a cool deal. Pay for economy and get to sit in first class. That's a cool deal. Now, what I've noticed is that in first class, people are a lot more relaxed than the people back in the economy section. People in the economy section feel like cattle. They've been herded all day long, and they are grumpy, and they don't want to talk to anybody. They've got their bunk, just leave me alone. People in first class are very different. They want to know everything about you. They want to hear your story. They want to talk to you. They want to tell you their story. One day I'm reading a book, and this gentleman looks over at me, and it was a religious book. I'm always reading. And he said, "Oh, you're a Christian." And I looked at him and I said, as I normally do, I said, "Actually, no, I'm not a Christian." I said, "But I am a follower of Jesus." He said, "Well, that's an interesting response." I looked at him and I said, "Well, dude, what's your gig? Where are you coming from?" I said, "Do you believe there's a God?" He said, "Well, probably." He said, "I'm not an atheist, but there might be one out there. You don't know." I said, "Well, all right." He said, "I tell you one thing, I'm not interested in church." He was real adamant about that. I said, "Well, what do you think about this Jesus dude?" He said, He said, "Well, that's an interesting topic. And I'm really intrigued by what you said in the beginning." He said, "That Jesus guy," he said, "that guy intrigues me." And so for the next 6 hours, this gentleman and I had a discussion on this airplane about the person, Jesus. Not a religion, remember, but about say it with me, a person. Then this conversation I have affectionately called the Jesus Dialogue. And that's what this series is built around, basically, is that 6-hour topic, that 6-hour discussion we had and the topics that we discussed during that discussion. So this is where we're headed. Tonight we're going to begin with that very beginning question. Why think any of this is true? Why think that the story of Jesus is true and that he is who he says he was or who his disciples said he was? And you have options, but let's just look at the facts. The undisputable facts are these. This is what everybody agrees with. They were a group of about 11 or 12 men back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s AD. They were all Jewish, and there was these group of men that went through the country proclaiming the message of a Jewish carpenter who they claimed had done miraculous things, whom they claimed had died on the cross, whom they claimed had come back to life, and who was actually the embodiment of God himself on planet Earth. Everybody will agree that there were these 11 or 12 Jewish men who went through the countryside claiming that. Everyone here in this room tonight, I think, would agree on that too. If you agree with that, say yes.
Yes.
These men did exist, and this is what their message was. If you agree with what I'm saying so far, say yes.
Yes.
Here's the question. When you think about what they were saying, you have one of 3 options. Was what they were saying true? The first is you've only got 2 options, really. Either it is or it's not. Are you here tonight? I got to get you out of here by 8:30, so you got to speak up, all right? If I have to stop and ask you to talk to me, it just slows things down. So speak up when I ask a question, all right? All right?
Yes.
There you go. Okay. Whew. Either it's true or it's not. Now, if you say it's not true, here's your other 2 options, composing 3. Either it's true or it's not true because it is, these 11 or 12 men, they were they're lying. There's one option. Or they themselves were sincere, but they were sincerely deceived. This is what some scholars call the legendary theory. They thought what they were presenting was true, but in fact it was a legend. The story had just become exaggerated by the time they were presenting. How many have ever heard of these 3 theories before? There's one that says it is true, it actually happened. How many have bumped into that? And I'm sorry if you were abused by people who believe that. But how many have bumped into that belief? Okay, how many have bumped into those that subscribe to the idea that they were just all lying? How many have bumped into that? And how many have bumped into the idea that, no, they were genuinely sincere, they were just deceived? How many have bumped into that's a legend? And that's really the more academic one. That's what most people that choose to not believe it's true. That's the legendary one is the one most people go towards. This is, what we're answering right now for me, is the most fundamental question we can ask. As a follower of Jesus, I have a lot of different opinions and ideas about a lot of theological stuff. But I don't get any life from any of that. I could be wrong about all of that stuff. My eggs are really all in one basket. It's in this basket that we're discussing this evening. It is the most fundamental question. Number one, is there a God? And if there is, what does he look like? I believe, and I'm going to share with you the reasons why I believe so, and ask you just to ponder them. I believe that Jesus is the decisive clue that we've been given. Not only that there is a God, but as to what that God looks like. Now notice what I'm saying. I did not say Christianity tells us what God looks like. How many are thankful for that tonight? Be honest, how many are thankful for that tonight? What I am saying is that Jesus, the person, not Christianity, the religion, Jesus, the person, is the decisive clue we've been given in regards to what kind of a person God really is. Now you've got three options. Either it's true, it's a lie, or it's a deception that they were sincerely passing on. Let's look at that lie theory first. There's some certain questions. If you say that the disciples were lying, there's a few questions you've got to first address. Number one is, why would these 11 men do this? If they're lying, why would they do it? You've got a problem because you really don't have any, what does that say underneath it? There is no what?
Motive.
No motive. If you go into a court of law and you're going to accuse someone of doing something, what's the first thing that court is going to ask you for?
Motive.
Motive. You're accusing them of lying. Your first problem is when asked, well, why would they do that? Your first problem is you've got no motive. You got no motive. Matter of fact, now I'll grant it to you, if they were like the TV evangelists down in the South, who were these 11 men going around with big Rolls Royces and big rings and big nice suits, and they were getting fat off this story, do you know what I mean by that? Mm-hmm. Would they have a motive to make this story up? Yes. But is that what history says happened? Did they gain anything by this? If you're going to say they're lying, did they gain anything by making this story up? No. Matter of fact, what happened? Talk to me. If they were killed for it, they not only lost, they not even gain anything, they lost everything for it. And not just them, their spouses and their children's lives were lost for it as well. It was heretical by Jewish standards to say the things they did. To make up a story that the Messiah had come and that he was Jehovah, he was Yahweh of the Old Testament. This is the kind of stuff that would get you killed. And they knew this. And it's amazing. The persecution starts off in the very beginning, not from Rome, but from Jerusalem itself, and Palestine itself. It comes out of the chute with persecution. Now, when you get to Rome, and Rome's persecution of those who were sharing this story. Nero, how many know who Nero was? Tacitus, how many know who Tacitus was? Tacitus was a Roman historian. None of you guys, not a lot of hands on that one. You guys don't stay up late at night reading Tacitus? Not your favorite author? No, I'll tell you why, because he's a dead, boring Roman historian dude. And he even though he was not a follower of Jesus, he actually felt sorry for Christians in those early first few years because of Nero's treatment of them. Nero would actually take Christians, he would dip them alive into burning oil. He would fry them, so to speak. Dip them alive into burning oil, and then he would tar them, and he would light them on fire and use them as, they were on stakes, they were on posts, he would use them as lighting in his banquet halls when he held parties. A Roman candle is not a firework sold in South Carolina, okay? It's a burning Christian. So here's your first problem. You've got to ask these guys, if it's a lie, you've got to ask yourself this question. Why would they do this? Why would they be lying? You've got to come up with a plausible answer to that. Number two, you've got to ask yourself this. Could they have pulled it off if they were lying? Could they have pulled it off? Remember, this isn't Star Wars. This isn't something that happened long, long ago in a galaxy far, far away. This is something that happened right here in Calgary last year. Do you understand what I'm saying? If they were lying, could it have been proved false easily? Could it have been easily falsified? Yes. We have no historical evidence that the disciples were lying. Nobody accuses them of lying. What's interesting is that even their enemies agree that Jesus did miracles. That's something the postmodern naturalistic worldview has to wrestle with. Even the enemies of Jesus' story said he did miracles. They just said he did it by the devil rather than by God. But did they agree that Jesus did supernatural stuff? Even the enemies of the story, did they agree with that? So for those of you who don't believe in the supernatural or that anything outside of science, that's anything you believe that nothing can happen but what science can explain, you have to wrestle with that. But even the enemies of Jesus didn't. I don't know whose that is, but that's pretty cool. Whoever that is. You can come up and get it, whoever it is. I want to know who it is. No, you don't have the guts to do it? It's all right. You can go get it. You can get it later. You don't do it now. Okay. It's pretty cool. I want one now. It's a little light-up ball. It's a sparkly ball. It just came rolling down the floor with all kinds of lights going everywhere. It's pretty cool. Thanks, man. Listen, I think it bounced and started going back. Look. There it is. Yeah, it is. Hold it up and show it to everybody because it's really cool. Can you hit it on something? Oh yeah, isn't that cool? I think that's cool. See, that's awesome. I know you have very. That's all right. I have kids too. They do stuff like that. Listen, you can. They not only is it easily falsified, it could be easily proven not true. Not only did it happen in a local place not long ago, but in the story they mentioned big names like Pontius Pilate. They mentioned the governor. They mentioned the high priest Caiaphas. They mentioned Joseph of Arimathea, which it would be the equivalent of one of your members of parliament. You understand? These are big names. Could you have gone and talked to these people and said, did these things really happen? Could you have done that back then? Talk to me. Could you have done that back then?
Yes.
Yes. And when that happened, did they ever come up with, these guys are lying, that never happened? Do we have any historical record of that happening? No. So there's another problem. Not only do you have no motive, you don't have any evidence that they were lying. You had no way to prove that they were lying. So that's, I hear you, but there's no evidence. The third thing is, and this is the biggest question for me, if they're lying, why are there no deserters? How many know anything about the history of Mormonism down in the States? How many know anything about that? When anything to be established in Mormonism, it has to be established on the testimony of 3 witnesses. In the very beginning of Mormonism, there were 3 witnesses who saw the angel Moroni give the golden tablets to Joseph Smith. When these Mormons started migrating from the east to the west, they got to about Missouri and those areas, and by that time they were starting to practice polygamy. And Missourians, they don't take too kindly to polygamy, so the Mormons began to be persecuted. When the persecution heated up, guess how many of those 3 witnesses came forth and said, maybe we didn't see that angel give those golden tablets to Joseph. And guess how many of them came forth and went back on their testimony? Guess how many?
2.
History tells us 2 out of 3. Okay, now here's my problem. You're going to tell me 11 men get together, and they make up a story that looks like this. And when the persecution turns up, they're being killed, their spouses are being killed, and their children are being killed because of this story you made up. And not one of those 11 men is going to come forward and say, maybe we made the whole thing up. That, to me, is pretty unlikely. Are you hearing what I'm saying? I know that you can't prove the story is true. What I'm asking you to do this evening is just look at the evidence we do have, look at the trajectory of that evidence, and believe something that's rational. To look at the evidence and believe something in opposition to the evidence, that's irrational. How many would agree with my definition tonight? That's a belief that's irrational. We all have beliefs to one degree or another, and we try to have rational beliefs. For me, to embrace the idea that these guys were lying, with that third question alone, produces some pretty irrational, for me it makes it a very irrational belief. It's pretty hard to believe that out of 11 men, think about it, how many know anything about Watergate, the history of Watergate down in the States? These men could hold that lie together for guess how long? Do you know the history? How many were alive back then when Watergate took place? How long did it take these men to keep this lie? Once it started, how long did it take these men to keep this lie going? 2 weeks. They could only keep the lie going for 2 weeks. And what's interesting is one of them, the guy that finally came clean, what was his name? What was his name? Do you know his name? John Dean, that's right. John Dean, when he came clean, what's interesting is none of these men had anything at stake except for their reputation and maybe a few years in prison. And you can ask Martha Stewart, it ain't that bad. Not the one they were going to have to go to. Matter of fact, the one Martha Stewart went to was 10 miles from my house where I live. That one ain't that bad. It's a nice resort, kind of, that you have to go to sometimes. Nobody's life was at stake. Nobody's spouse's lives were at stake. And nobody's children's lives were at stake. And these men can only keep this lie going for 2 weeks. You're telling me that 11 men are lying about a story that grew in such a short time to an incredible degree that Nero could even blame the fires of the Roman Empire on this group of people. They were so large by then, and people would have believed it. To me, that is a little hard to believe when you look at the facts that these guys were just out there lying about it. They were making it up. That's a little bit much for me. I think you're a wonderful person if you believe that, but I can't when I look at it. Matter of fact, that's why most scholars do not believe that they were lying. How many realize, even those who don't believe in the story of Jesus as in the Gospels, they don't believe the disciples were lying? How many can see tonight why they don't believe that way? How many would agree that it's a little implausible to say that they were lying? How many agree with that so far? What most people who don't believe in Jesus say is that it's a legend, that the disciples themselves were just sincerely deceived. So take your next handout with me to the one that says of legends and lore. Let's look at the legendary theory for just a second. And we're just going to ask, once again, some questions. And these are valid questions. If this theory is true, we've got to ask the questions. Question number 1, how do Orthodox monotheistic, what does that mean? What does monotheistic mean? One God. They believe in one God. If someone's going to claim to be God, this isn't like Buddha. He's not just a God. This is the God, the God of the Old Testament, the creator God, the lawgiver. This is Yahweh. How do Orthodox monotheistic Jewish men, these 11 men, how do they go against their most fundamental convictions within their own culture and begin to worship a contemporary Jewish carpenter as the embodiment of Yahweh? If you're going to tell me it was a legend that these guys were deceived, I'm just asking you how it happened. How did these fundamental Orthodox monotheistic Jewish men come to worship this carpenter they knew from Nazareth as the embodiment of Yahweh himself from the Old Testament? How did they do that? How did that happen? It's the most antithetical thing you could come up with. One of the other challenges, the cultural problem is huge here. Because within Judaism, you've got safeguards for this. Look at John 19:7. Jesus insisted, we have a law, and according to that law, he must what?
Die.
Because he claimed to be the what? What was the penalty for worshiping someone as God? What was the penalty for that?
Death.
Death. If you claimed to be God, you were put to death. If you worshiped someone as God, you were put to death. It was called blasphemy. It was punishable by stoning. How does this happen? The second problem is the culture. The culture produces so many problems. It actually plays into what we looked at a moment ago with the lie theory, too. I mean, think about it. The story of Jesus is so anti-cultural to that day. It's so antithetical to Jewish culture. This was a culture run by men. If you're going to tell me these men are passing on, let's just talk about the lie theory for a second, then we'll come back to the legendary one. If you're going to tell me the men were making this up, here's another weak part, another problem. First of all, a bunch of Jewish men in first century Palestine are going to make up a story. And have you noticed how Jesus treats women in this story? How many think that Jesus' treatment of women, according to first century Palestinian standards, how many think Jesus' treatment of women is just breathtaking? How many notice that? Matter of fact, who are the first ones to find Jesus in the tomb?
Women.
The women. Who are the first ones to proclaim a risen Lord?
Women.
Who are the? Could you tell me where the men are in the story? What's going on with the men? They're hiding. Why are they hiding? Because they're a bunch of cowards. Are you with me? I'm going to submit to you that if men were making this story up, it would look a little bit different. Are you hearing what I'm saying tonight? It wouldn't read like that. It was a lie. But there's also got this challenge, this cultural challenge with the legendary theory as well. How could it go? How could he go in this culture? This is question number 2. From an ordinary carpenter in fundamental Judaism, how could he go from a carpenter to Yahweh, the embodiment and revelation of Yahweh himself? How can he make this transition overnight? I was sitting in on a college course one time where the professor said, listen, Buddha was an atheist, the great Gautama Buddha. How many have ever heard of Buddha before? How many know who Buddha is? Okay. Buddha, who himself was an atheist, could go from not even believing in a God to actually being God among his followers. If that can happen for Buddha, is it so hard to believe that Jesus could go from a carpenter to being God by his followers? Is it really that hard to believe? And how many think that sounds viable at first? How many think, okay, you got a point there. Be honest. How many think, I know you're a good Christian, some of you, but how many think, that does sound like a really good point? Here's the problem with it. Do you know how long it took Buddha to become God? 500 years. What kind of culture did Buddha become God in? It was not monotheistic, it was, what's the opposite of monotheism? Anybody know? It was polytheistic. What does that mean? They believe in many gods. It wasn't a culture that was very opposed to making people God, who actually would kill people if they claimed to be God. This was a culture that actually made people gods all the time. There were many gods. And Buddha didn't become the God. Buddha just became a god in a polytheistic culture that was used to doing this with legends and lores. And it took how long to take place? How long did it take place? 500 years for this to take place. And it only happened with one sect of Buddhism. Not Buddhism across the board. It only happened in one sect of Buddhism. Now you're going to tell me that Jesus, with the story of Jesus, you don't have 500 years. You don't have 50 years. It is arguable when you look at the dates, you don't even have 5 years. Jesus comes out of the gate by these disciples, fully divine, not in a polytheistic culture, but a monotheistic, which means he's fully divine. That means he is Yahweh. You know, everything that this guy we've been worshiping all along through Jewish history, this is the dude. And not only that, but it's in a culture that is favorable towards making people God or deathly opposed to making people God. You have to explain, how does this legend take root in this kind of a culture? How does it take root and grow so quickly in this kind of a culture? These, I think, are challenges to the legendary theory. How many think that's at least the challenge that the legendary theory has to answer? How does it happen with these men in that culture? And how does it happen so quickly with these men in that culture? And lastly, question number 3, how does a legend grow this fast and this large when there are eyewitnesses still living, both hostile and friendly? Who do you think would be the one most opposed to let's assume it's a legend for a moment. Who do you think would be the most opposed to these exaggerations about Jesus? Who do you think it would be? You can look at it there in your handout. Who do you think it would be?
Pharisees.
The establishment.
Be James. Who is James?
His brother.
Jesus' brother. Why Jesus' brother? Anybody here have a brother? Anybody here have an older brother? Yeah, your parents already think your older brother is the Son of God. Do you hear what I'm saying?
Amen.
What must this have been like? Think about it. What must it have been like to have been raised the younger brother of Jesus? Who stole the cookie from the cookie jar? Yes, it wasn't Jesus. Why can't you be more like your brother? Oh, I forgot. Be honest. What must it have been like to grow up. And then your brother starts making claims that he's God. And honestly, the Gospels portray James. All throughout the 4 Gospels, James thinks Jesus is a lunatic. How many have seen that? But then you get to the New Testament, and James isn't still saying that Jesus is a lunatic. James is actually the author of one of the New Testament books. And he calls himself a servant of Jesus Christ. I got to ask you, if it's a legend, how does that happen with a brother? I'm just asking. How many think there's a problem there? That's challenging. I mean, think it. The brother's going to be the one to say, you're starting to stretch that a little bit. He goes from thinking Jesus is a lunatic to, after the resurrection, calling himself the servant of his older brother Jesus, because he realizes his older brother is more than just his older brother. I think that's beautiful. That's a power. You got to at least, whether you are a follower of Jesus tonight or a believer in Jesus tonight, I don't want to force this on you by any means. You are free to believe in Jesus or not to. I don't want to coerce you at all. All I'm asking you to do is just to wrestle with this, to at least consider this. Think about some of the other questions. Question number 4. Where's the cultural catalyst for the legend? If there was a legend about a Messiah going to be born in Israel at that time, I'm just submitting to you, it wouldn't have looked like this. What did Israel want more than anything else? They wanted to be free from who?
Romans.
The Romans. And so the Romans, the Messiah was going to come. And what was the purpose of the Messiah? Talk to me. Deliver them from the Romans. And so you're going to make up a legend. Here's this cultural catalyst. Think about how legends are born. Is this strong enough to create maybe a legend in that culture about a Messiah? Would that have been a strong enough catalyst for that to happen? Would it have been? Be honest, would it have been? But what would the legend have looked like with that catalyst? Would it have looked like first that the Messiah showed up, but he claimed to be God? That's one of the catches, that he claimed to be Yahweh. Would it have looked like that? Number 2, would it have looked like, and not only did he claim to be God, but he claimed you should worship him as God, and he went up against the Romans, and guess what? How's the story go? If it's a legend, how does the story go? Who won when Jesus went head-to-head with the Romans? The Romans. What did they do to Jesus? Yeah, what happened to false messiahs? Where did they end up? Where did they end up? False messiahs ended on a cross in the Roman Empire. Interesting. Interesting. So here's this Messiah. You've got cultural catalyst. Here's the Messiah. He finally shows up. He goes head to head. He takes on the Romans. Guess what? Jesus is the Messiah, but he took on the Romans, and guess what happened? He lost. They killed him, and we're still under Roman rule. Let's follow this Messiah. Is that the kind of legend that's going to, overnight, take off with the kind of strength and gusto that you find happening with the story of Jesus? Think about it. You got to wrestle with this. If you're saying it's a legend, you got to answer these questions. Number 5, how do you reconcile the claim that this story is a legend with the claim that these men are giving eyewitness testimony? Look at what John says in 1 John 1 through 5, which we have what? Heard, which we have, what does it say? Talk to me. Seen with
our eyes.
Our eyes, which we have what? Looked at with our what? And have touched. We have what? And it has appeared to us. We proclaim to you that what we have seen and we have heard. This is the message that we have heard from him, and we declare it to, what does it say? To you. At this point, by definition, a legend is someone I heard from someone else, and I'm passing it on. How many agree with that so far? It also includes the element that it happened long, long ago. There's no more survivable witnesses, so whether you can verify this story. How many agree with that so far? That's what a legend is. How do you reconcile this idea that it's a legend with these men that are saying, this is not an exaggeration. This isn't something I heard from someone. I'm not being deceived about this. I'm not sincere, but deceived. I saw this with my own 2 eyes. Do you catch what they're saying? I'm submitting to you tonight that, by definition, is not a legend. If anything, if you're going to say it wasn't true, and they're saying, but I saw it with my own two eyes, if you're going to say it was not true, then you have to say it's not a legend. Those men were what? Lying. And how many saw a moment ago how implausible the lie theory really is? How many saw that? I would submit to you that when you look at it honestly, the legendary theory becomes just as implausible as the lie theory when you look at what these men were actually talking about. Whatever you say about the disciples, you have to say this. These men sincerely believed they had seen what they saw, and they were willing to die for it. Not only were they willing to die for it, they were willing to watch their spouses and their children die for it. They claimed that this man had been crucified on a Roman cross, but that he had come back to life. Some people say, well, okay, fine. They're saying they saw him. You have to say either they were lying, which how many saw that was implausible tonight again? How many saw that? Or you have to say, okay, fine, it's not a legend, it's not a lie. They were just hallucinating. I would encourage you in the handout on the resurrection, and we're not going to read it because we don't have time, but it's 1 Corinthians 15 there at the top of that handout. You can go home and read that. Over 500 people see Jesus at one time after the resurrection. 500 people. Okay, that's a hallucination. I'll give it to you. My question is this. What the heck were those guys smoking? 500 people see the same exact hallucination at the same time? That has got to be some good weed. Are you hearing what I'm saying tonight? Think about it. What were those guys smoking? What do you mean they had a hallucination? Simultaneously? That's unheard of. Oh, no. Okay, fine. But those 500. Okay, that wasn't a hallucination. But those guys, they were just lying. Well, now we're back to the lie theory. How many see how implausible the lie theory is? See, and this is where I can't escape it. My stomach, and I'm just being honest with you tonight, my stomach is so sick when I look at modern Christianity. And I'm not asking for a raise of hands on that. I just see so much in modern Christianity and what it's associated with that I don't want to have anything to do with that. Is there anybody, let me at least ask this, that's ever been the slightest bit concerned about what modern Christianity is becoming associated with? But when I look at the facts of Jesus, and I look at them honestly, every avenue I try to take, other than that the story is true, always brings me back to that being the only option. Are you hearing me? And that's why I'm saying tonight, no, I'm not necessarily a Christian, but I am a follower of who? Of Jesus. Because when I look at the evidence open-mindedly, to me, there is only, and I don't have to unplug my intellect. I can be intellectual, I can be thoughtful, I can be critical, I can open-mindedly look at all the objections, but when I truly open-mindedly look at them, it always brings me back to one intellectual conclusion. The most plausible option out of all of these is that what they said happened actually did. How many would agree with that tonight? That's the most plausible option. But now you've got some problems. Because now you've got the naturalistic worldview you've got to wrestle with. Because the naturalistic worldview says miracles don't, talk to me, people that die don't come back to life. And I would just submit to you this. We are living in a culture that is naturalistic. What that simply means is that we would always prefer a natural cause and effect, law of nature-based explanation for why things happen. How many would agree with me tonight? You would prefer that. But are there things happening for which science can't explain still today? How many would agree with that? Why can't we just say, instead of, see, this belief that nothing can happen, that nothing happens except that it's explainable by natural laws, that belief, I'm submitting to you, is not based on scientific reasoning. Can you prove, with hierarchical evidence, can you prove that nothing ever happens outside of natural laws? Can you prove that? Talk to me. Can you prove that? No. It's a neat philosophy, but that's what it is. You can't prove it. Now, do things most of the time work within natural laws? But think about light itself. These lights that are shining here. Do you realize light is an anomaly? Is light a particle or is it a wave? Science doesn't say both. Science says neither. Why? Because it acts like some of one and some of the other, but it's not purely one or the other. It's neither. It's something else. And can science get their head around that yet? Why can't we look at the story of Jesus and just simply say, there might be things that happen on this planet that are larger than what we can explain? How many would think that would be a plausible answer? Just to be scientific and say, we just can't explain that. And say, we might not know everything yet. How many think that would be a nice option? See, when you stop at that, I'm a naturalist in the sense that I prefer natural explanations. But I'm not a naturalist to the degree that when I look at all other options, for me to hold on to naturalism, I've got to embrace some pretty non-plausible beliefs about Jesus. How many can see that? So at that point, the most plausible option for me is to take my naturalistic worldview and to hold it according to what I can prove. And to look at Jesus and say, yeah, I see what's there, but I can't legitimately believe they were telling a lie. And I can't match up that they were passing on a legend with the way it reads. So my only plausible answer is, I don't know how to explain this with science yet, but my only logical, most plausible option is the disciples were telling the truth. How many would agree with that tonight? If you don't agree with it, that's fine. That's fine. I'm just asking you to open-mindedly consider the evidence. I'm going to close tonight with Wolfgang Schadenwald. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of Wolfgang Schadenwald. Anybody here by chance ever heard of him? Really cool guy. He is the premier Homeric scholar. In other words, Greek literature. He is the world's leading scholar in looking at literature and looking at whether it's legend or historically accurate or historically reliable, at least. He was invited by Tübingen University there in Germany. He was invited by their seminary to come and look at the four Gospels themselves as historical documents. Not the inspired Word of God, just four historical documents, and tell us whether it's exaggeration, whether it's legend, whether it looks more like legendary material that you're used to, or whether it looks like documents that are more historically reliable. And when compared with historically reliable standards, their standard rules, and their standard tests, and their standard methods, this is what he said. As someone, you can follow with me in the gray section on the very back. As someone who has acquired some knowledge of literature, I am particularly concerned here to note that when we read the Synoptic Gospels, that's Matthew, Mark, and Luke, he said, we cannot be other than captivated by the experiential vividness with which we are confronted. The conditions of their time stand before us. Nature and landscape, the landscape of Palestine, the Sea of Galilee, places from the coast to the far side of the Jordan, Nazareth with its sheer cliff. If only we read the text simply enough, we can imagine Jesus traveling here and there, a situation which we misunderstand if we miss the repeated other way. The most important words are spoken, and actions performed on the way as no more than literary decoration. I know of, this is the significant part, I know of no other area of history writing, biography, or poetry where I encounter so great a wealth of material in such a small place. What is he saying by this statement? Does anyone see what he's saying? He's saying if you're looking at the historical evidence for whether or not a historical document is reliable, he says when we look at the four Gospels, if we're just going to go by not what they say, but how they say it, the tests that we put towards every other document, when you look at that, as an expert in this field, I know of no other writing document that I've ever read that has as much evidence in favor of this being historically reliable as we do in the concentration that I find in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. How many think that is astounding for a secular scholar to say that? And so we ask ourselves, then why doesn't everyone embrace these? I have two hypotheses on this. Number one, the story of Jesus has been abused. How many would agree with that tonight? And number two, those who claim to follow Jesus ruled the known world for over 1,200 years during the Middle Ages. How many are aware of that history? And if God looks like that, there are people that will believe anything else not to have to believe in a God like that. How many would agree with me that tonight on my hypothesis? What I'm sharing with you tonight is not a justification of Middle Ages Christianity. I'm with you. It is horrific. It's not a justification of even current Christianity. I'm with you there. I'm very concerned about that. What I'm sharing with you tonight is just simply this. When we talk about the Jesus dialogue, there is still something radically significant about this person, Jesus Christ. Jesus is the most influential figure in all of human history. C.S. Lewis said it so well. If you look on your first handout where we started tonight, C.S. Lewis wrote, "The things he says are very different from what any other teacher has said. Others say, this is the truth about the universe. This is the way you ought to go. But he says, I am the truth, the way, and the life." I'm submitting to you that Jesus is really who the disciples claimed. And when you stop to listen to what Jesus taught, Jesus was not just unique among humans. Jesus was even unique to modern Christianity. How many have noticed that? Can I see that Jesus was unique to modern Christianity? And so I'm simply asking you in this series, what was it that this Jesus taught? What does it look like to follow this Jesus? Not a religion, not a denomination, none of that. What does it look to follow this person? It's very different than what Christian history has portrayed. And I think it's life-changing. Thank you so much for coming tonight. How many are glad you came? How many are glad you were here? How many are going to invite a friend tomorrow night? Grab someone you know and bring them. I promise this will be a safe place. If they don't like church, if they don't like Christians, they'll like it here. So please invite them, and we're going to have a good time tomorrow night. Tomorrow night we're looking at probably one of the most significant apologetic questions that are being asked by neo-atheism today, is how can you believe in an all-good, all-powerful God when you look at the state of the train wreck of affairs that is taking place on this planet. In other words, people are asking, if God's so good, why is the suck factor of my life so high? Anyone ever wrestled with that question before? Yeah, that's what we're going to be looking at. Jesus has a very unique answer to that. It may shock you to find that it's very different than what modern Christians are giving us the answer to that. But that shouldn't really surprise us that much. So thank you for coming. God bless you guys. Have a wonderful evening. If you have questions, write them down. Leave them with the registrar's table. We'll be answering questions each night as well. Take advantage of the rest of the material in this handout. There's so much good material there. There's 4 handouts worth, and we didn't get a chance to cover it all. But this is the intellectual basis for why thinking, critically intelligent people can really possess a genuine faith in the person of Jesus Christ without having to unplug their intellect at the same time. So God bless you guys. Be safe going home. We'll see you tomorrow night. Thanks for coming.